This is bad evidence of racism. This is how you do not identify racism. And if you really care about racism and defeating racists in this world, you should not ever marshal videos like this in your arguments, because you simply convince skeptical people like myself that you do not have a good case, which hurts the racist or anti-racist cause. Hello everybody, you are listening to the Magic Skeptic, aka Magic Dara, and you are very welcome to another episode of A Magician's Thoughts. So in this episode, truth be told, I'm about to embark upon probably one of the most dangerous journeys in my YouTube career thus far, and that's because I'm about to touch the topic of race and racism. However, I've decided to approach this in an arguably novel manner. I'm not going to make a video about how to identify racism. I'm instead going to make this video about how not to identify racism. So look, I don't know if that's a particularly original idea. Some of you may be very well aware of other channels that have taken this approach. But you see, guys, my channel, if you've been watching it for any length of time, it has certainly evolved from magic to be something that's more to do with skepticism and philosophy. And skepticism is one of those words that people tend to misunderstand. It very often gets conflated with what many of you might call cynicism. Skepticism, guys, as far as I'm concerned, and this is the working definition I'm using for this video, skepticism is simply a reasonable demand for evidence, logic, and reason. So a skeptic is a person who simply won't believe something unless there's good evidentiary warrant in order to believe it. And that's it. And bringing this then back to the conversation of racism, I'm sure you'll agree with me when I say that accusations of racism have become exceedingly common. So much so that I think, in my view, and I don't know if you'll agree with me, dear listener, but in my view, the word racism and the label of racist, both of those terms have kind of lost their currency, specifically the label of racist. I'll just be brutally honest with you right now and say that when I hear somebody being called a racist in the media, or if I see on social media that someone has been labeled as a racist, I don't even believe it anymore. I don't just take it at face value. And that's kind of what this video is about, really.
It's gross. It's racist.
It's not. But it's so not.
The question is, should we take allegations of racism at face value, or should we dig deeper? Now, of course, as a skeptic, I'm going to recommend that you should always dig deeper. If somebody is called a racist, look into it, see what the allegations pertain to, and make up your own mind. Because, and again, I have to say and be honest with you, I have seen so many people being labelled as racist or bigoted or homophobic or sexist for saying things that frankly wouldn't have even registered on my radar as relevant. I mean, this happens to comedians, for Christ's sake. Comedians, the people in our society whose job it is to get up on a stage and say things that are not true. Comedians get up and they do their gags, and I think some people obviously must take these gags literally and come to the conclusion that this comedian is a racist or a xenophobe or some kind of a bigot. And of course, comedians are just trying to make us laugh. And sometimes the best way, in fact, very often the best way to make us laugh is to deal in taboo subject matter. Comedians have been doing that since the dawn of time, as far as I'm aware. So coming full circle then, what am I talking about here? I'm simply pointing out that allegations of racism can be misappropriated. And I'm making the case that they are so frequently misappropriated at this point in time that the label of racist has lost its currency. Where people like me, a person who really cares about racism, I'm an Irish person and I live in the UK. It's only 50 or 60 years ago in this very country of England where shop windows had signs that included statements like no blacks, no dogs, and no Irish. So I don't need to be told about racism. I understand that it is a pernicious problem and that wherever it is, it needs to be stamped out. But if you really care about racism and stamping it out, you must stop misidentifying it because it causes the racist label to lose its currency. It's the boy who cried wolf. If you cry wolf enough of times and you're not being genuine, or you've misappropriated the word wolf, you might have thought you were looking at a wolf, but if you were mistaken enough at times, and if you've been disingenuous enough times with the usage of that label, the label loses its currency. And then, of course, when you cry wolf and you're telling the truth, you get eaten by the wolf. And so I'm going to plead with you today, guys. If you really care about racism and you call yourself an anti-racist, if you really want to root out the racists of the world, you must endeavour and stop using the word racist where it does not apply. And that brings us to the meat and potatoes of this particular video. And that is Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson is the current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. If you haven't seen him... Boris Johnson kind of looks like a strange, weird cousin of Donald Trump. He's got the whole blonde, crazy hair thing going on. I'll include an image on the screen for those of you who may not know who he is. But Boris Johnson is the current Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And as a conservative Prime Minister of this country, he frequently encounters allegations of bigotry and racism and xenophobia. Now, it might sound strange to say, especially since you've seen Boris Johnson in the thumbnail, but this video isn't actually about Boris Johnson, albeit he is at the epicenter of a clip I'm about to show you in a moment. Rather, this video is about, as I described earlier, how not to identify racism. So I was surfing on Twitter recently and I happened across a tweet by none other than John Cleese, who is a very, very famous comedian. John Cleese, of course, is probably best known for Monty Python and Fawlty Towers, which is one of my favourite shows of all time. But John Cleese shared a tweet, which I'm going to pop on the screen right now. And it was a tweet of a video of Boris Johnson at a Conservative press conference, where Boris Johnson appears to engage in what many have labelled as a gross and explicit act of racism. So before I go any further, I want to show you that clip and then we're going to dissect it and discuss it and figure out if indeed what you're about to see constitutes an explicit and obscene example of racism. So check out the following clip and we'll meet back here in a moment to discuss it. Welcome back. So ask yourself, is this an explicit example of racism? Is Boris Johnson an out-and-out fascist, racist, bigot? I don't think so. And I hope you will agree with me as I talk you through my reasoning here. Now, if you watch the video carefully, obviously you'll see that Boris Johnson shakes the hand of seemingly everyone in the clip except the two black gentlemen, or persons of colour if you'd prefer. And so, of course, many on Twitter, the Twitter mob, have just run with this. And indeed, I'm not entirely sure what John Cleese's meaning was in the tweet, but he seems to be, with the wording, albeit I can't guarantee that he's not just being ironic, but he seems to be pointing out that this is rather unbelievable in the sense that he is disgusted by the Prime Minister's behaviour. If I've gotten John Cleese wrong here and he clarifies with a tweet later on, I will be sure to include a correction in this video. But for now, I'm assuming John Cleese was horrified by this, as he presumably viewed it, disgusting example of racism. So does it count as an example of racism? Well, guys, I'm not convinced. I don't think this is a good example of racism, and here's why. If you watch the clip once again, you will see that Boris Johnson shakes the hand of every single individual who extends their hand. The two persons of colour in the video do not desist applauding, and so They do not extend their hands, and so Boris Johnson doesn't shake their hands. It would be rather unnatural for him to interrupt their applause by jutting his hand in there, would it not? I certainly think it would be. But now some of you are going to think, oh, you're just a racist apologizer, or you're just a conservative and you want to get Boris Johnson off the hook. First of all, no, I'm not a conservative. And if you want to know my politics, if you must know my politics, let me tell you that I would absolutely identify as left-leaning and liberal, and my voting record demonstrates that with considerable clarity. Right? So I'm no fan of Boris Johnson. In fact, if you want to know my specific view on Boris Johnson, I think he's a Dauphin. I think he's a very poor prime minister of this country, and I think he has mishandled the coronavirus pandemic, and I'm disgusted by the recent announcement that the Conservative government plans to introduce a law to prevent families in the north of Ireland from seeking justice against those who murdered their families during the Troubles. So I have quite a few bones to pick with the Conservative government and with Boris Johnson more specifically. And if you want me to make a video about any of those specific issues, please do jump into the comments below and let me know. But I just want to make the case and just point out that I am not biased here. If anybody was going to find Boris Johnson guilty of racism, it was going to be me. But you see, guys, again, I am a skeptic. I have to follow the evidence where it leads. And the question in this video is, does this video constitute evidence of racism? Now, absolutely it could. Maybe the reason Boris Johnson didn't shake the hands of those two gentlemen is because of the colour of their skin. But again, ask yourself, what would have to be true for that to be the case? What would have to be factually occurring in Boris Johnson's mind for this to be an example of his racism? Remember, the world is watching. Cameras are watching. The news is watching. And Boris Johnson makes his way through the crowd. And if those who are accusing Boris Johnson of racism in this video are correct, what happened in his mind was, the cameras are watching, but I'm going to intentionally not shake the hand of those two gentlemen because they are black. I'm going to be discriminatory in my handing out of handshakes, and I'm going to intentionally ignore these two black gentlemen because I don't like black people and I think I'm superior to them as a white person. Don't you dare clip that. That could be very easily clipped to make me look like the worst scumbag. But think about that. Do you honestly think that Boris Johnson is a racist who in that moment decided in front of the world who's watching? Do you really think that in that moment he decided to express his racism by refusing a handshake to the two persons of colour in the line of people that he walked along? Is that really what you think? Because if that's the case, guys, if that's what you think, then I really can't help you. I don't know what to say. I'm happy to say that this could very well be an example of racism, but the video is not enough, guys. It is not enough to demonstrate racism. It just simply is not. I'm not removing racism as a candidate explanation. Again, there are multiple candidate explanations in play here. We've already discussed two. One of them is that Boris Johnson is a racist and that he's simply not shaking the hands of the black gentleman. The other candidate explanation, as I mentioned earlier, is that Boris Johnson is simply shaking the hands of those who were extending their hands, which the two black gentlemen clearly don't. Why is that explanation not also possible? To anybody who saw that clip, to anybody who was convinced by it as an obvious example of bigotry, ask yourself that question. Why can't this just be the case that Boris Johnson simply shook the hands of those who were extending their hands? It's a good question. And the third candidate explanation that comes to mind, albeit this isn't an exhaustive list, is that Boris was just shaking hands randomly. And it's possible, by shaking hands with random individuals, that he could have just missed those two black gentlemen. But of course, people in that moment will just say, see, Magic Skeptic, you're simply apologising for obvious racism. How dare you? Well, guys, if you don't know me well enough by now, and you think that I've got bad intentions here and that my motives are immoral, well then again, I can't help you. I would have thought that my record on this channel, my morality would be clear at this point. Any of you who have been watching my channel for long enough will surely have surmised at this point that I'm not some kind of a racist, bigoted scumbag. And if that is what you think about me, well then unsubscribe. There's no point in you being here. I've obviously completely failed in my capacity as a communicator to convey who I am to you in a successful manner. And so, yeah, if that's the case, I guess we're going to part ways at this point. So, just to summarize thus far, if you're going to be truly skeptical, you must ask yourself, what is the evidence here and what does the evidence suggest? Is there evidentiary warrant for any one of the candidate explanations that's been suggested thus far? And please remember that this isn't an exhaustive list. There may well be another candidate explanation that is superior to the three I've offered thus far, but those are the three that occurred to me right off the bat. Again, just to repeat them, candidate explanation 1 is that Boris Johnson is an absolute bigoted racist who did not shake the hands of these gentlemen because they were black. Candidate explanation number 2 is that Boris Johnson was shaking the hands of people who were extending their hands to him. And candidate explanation number 3 is that he simply engaged in a random pattern of handshaking, which, just by chance, excluded these 2 black gentlemen. I leave it to you to decide which one of these explanations seems most likely, but in my view, I think it's pretty obvious looking at the video that he simply shakes the hands of those who extend their own hand. And that's pretty satisfactory to me. But I'm suspecting that some of you right now are screaming at your screen because you've got some counterpoints. Counterpoints which I'm going to address right now. So what I'd like to do now is anticipate some potential counterpoints that people might raise while watching this video, in the hopes that I will address them before people jump into the comments and attack me. No, I'm kidding. You guys are actually really good in the comments. I must say, the dialogue in the comments, 99 times out of 100 is incredibly respectful, and I must thank you for that, guys, because as I've said time and again, my primary aim with this channel is to open a dialogue with people and to get to the truth of the matter, because if I'm mistaken, I'm the first person who wants to know. Speaking of which, if I'm mistaken about this video, and if you can think of a solid argument which demonstrates that Boris Johnson is in fact a racist, and that evidence can be found in the video that I shared with you, again, please jump into the comments and make me aware. But for now, some of you are probably thinking, but Magic Skeptic, there's much more evidence on the table than simply this video. You might say that you have many other examples of Boris Johnson's racism, which lead you to the conclusion that this video is best explained by racist intent, that the happenings in this video are best explained by racist intent, right? And that seems like a totally fair point. And I'm not denying that. I've certainly seen statements by Boris Johnson in the past that made me think, oh, Boris, what the hell are you saying there, right? I won't get into any of those statements here and now because they're beyond the scope of this video. Remember, my goal in this video is to show how not to identify racism. So I want to deal with this objection. Again, just to reiterate, some people watching this video are thinking, but Magic Skeptic, there's evidence elsewhere that Boris Johnson is in fact a bigoted racist. And so when we watch this video and we see him skip those 2 black gentlemen, it's all the more telling. It seems like just another notch on his racist belt. It seems like just another piece of evidence in a growing pile of evidence. And if that is the case, fair enough. It might in fact be fair to conclude that Boris Johnson is a racist. My problem is that this video doesn't get to be a piece of evidence on that pile. Why? Because this video does not contain evidence of racism. Simply because he skipped the 2 black gentlemen does not prove your racism case. It just doesn't. This is a problem that I see very frequently, I'm afraid to say, in the left wing of politics. And again, I count myself as left wing. But there are many people on the left who simply see a disparity and jump to the conclusion that racism is the explanation. Just to give you an analogy, I am a classroom teacher. If I had a classroom of 10 students, 9 of whom were boys and 1 of whom was a girl, and the 9 boys were doing well in their exams while the girl was doing poorly, there are many people on the left, I'm afraid to say, who would see that disparity and come to the conclusion that there was a sexist explanation that the educational system must be systemically sexist, or that the teacher must be engaged in sexist practices whereby the boys are given more support than the one girl in that classroom. Now, are those possible candidate explanations? Of course they are. I wouldn't deny that those are candidate explanations, but just because something is a candidate explanation doesn't make it the explanation. There are other candidate explanations on offer. Maybe that girl is just a lazy student who doesn't bother. Did anybody ever think of that? Right? Maybe that girl comes from a very poor family who doesn't support her. Right? Maybe she comes from a bad background and she doesn't get any educational support at home. I'll tell you right now as a teacher that most of the students who thrive in the educational systems are students who come from stable family backgrounds with incredible support and love in the home environment. The students who come from very bad backgrounds, where they have addiction in their families, where they have absentee parents and so forth, those are the students who struggle at school, in my experience. And so just to take that analogy to a close, the girl in the class of boys who does poorly might very well be doing poorly for a reason that has absolutely nothing to do with sexism. And so you do not get to use this Boris Johnson clip as another example of his racism. You can't say, see, look, he skipped the black guys. Racist, racist. No, you haven't demonstrated that. You are merely making an assertion. You are claiming that the reason he skipped the black people was because he was a racist. That's a claim. And what happened in the video isn't conclusive evidence of that claim. Again, maybe the reason he skipped them is because he's a racist, but it could also be equally likely, if not more likely in my view, that the reason he didn't shake their hands was because they didn't extend their hand. What are you supposed to do in that scenario? You see, guys, this is a failure of skeptical thinking. To look at this video of Boris Johnson failing to shake the hands of these two black gentlemen and to conclude that this is an example of obvious racism and bigotry, it is just a failure of skeptical thinking. The only evidence in this video is that Boris Johnson didn't shake the hands of these two black gentlemen. You cannot just assert that the reason that this occurred is because Boris Johnson is a racist. And if you assert that without evidence, and again, the video is not evidence of racism, the video merely shows that he did not shake the hands of two black gentlemen. For the video to serve as evidence of racism, you must draw the connecting line between him not shaking their hands and racist intent. If you cannot demonstrate racist intent in the video, then you cannot possibly put this up on a pedestal as an example of racism. You just can't do it. Just like that girl's failure in the classroom full of boys is not necessarily evidence of sexism, Boris Johnson's failure to shake the hands of these two black gentlemen is not necessarily evidence of racism. I cannot make that any more simple, guys. And if we disagree on this fundamental point, I'm not so sure if we're ever going to find common ground here. Remember, just because you have evidence of Boris Johnson being racist elsewhere does not mean that this video is also evidence of his racism. That is not how this works. This is bad evidence of racism. This is how you do not identify racism. And if you really care about racism and defeating racists in this world, you should not ever marshal videos like this in your arguments, because you simply convince skeptical people like myself that you do not have a good case, which hurts the racist or anti-racist cause. When you marshal bad arguments in favor of a position, you convince people who see those arguments for the bad arguments that they are, you convince those people that you do not have a good position. If there is good evidence of Boris Johnson's racism, share that evidence. Not this video. The video I just showed you, again, is not good evidence. If you share the video that we're discussing here and now as evidence of Boris Johnson's racism, I promise you, you will have lost people to the anti-racist cause. That is why bad reasoning is so troubling, guys. That is why bad arguments are so toxic. Bad arguments simply galvanize people against your position. This is why I hate seeing atheists use bad arguments against God's existence, because it convinces religious people that they're really correct. Because there are plenty of bad arguments against God's existence. Just do a quick Google search or a search through YouTube and you'll see plenty of atheists using terrible arguments against God's existence. And those terrible arguments are used by theists to demonstrate the strength of their case. And so too, it is the case with anti-racism, guys. If you use bad evidence of racism to allege that somebody is a racist, you simply convince everybody that that person is actually innocent of the allegation you're making. An allegation which, in reality, might actually be true. So if you really do care, I must reiterate, if you really do care about the anti-racism movement, you must desist with your usage of bad arguments like this one. The idea that Boris Johnson didn't shake the hands of two black gentlemen at a Conservative rally is not good evidence, especially when those two black gentlemen did not extend their hands like everybody else did. So I want to show you some of the reaction to this video of Boris not shaking the hands of these black gentlemen. This video is over a year old, but it's become popular again and has become viral again in the last week or so. Again, shared by notable people like John Cleese. Just keep in mind the principles of skepticism as I've articulated them to you. Remember, a skeptic does not believe something until there is sufficient evidentiary warrant. In other words, there's good logic and evidence to support the premise and the conclusion. Okay? So again, the premise of the video, the conclusion that people are arriving at is that Boris is obviously a racist because he didn't shake the hands of these two gentlemen. And when you say, why do you think he's a racist? Well, look, he didn't shake their hands and they're black, so obviously it must be racism. When you say that out loud, if you can't hear the utter irrationality in that statement, I don't know if I can help you. They're black, so therefore the reason he didn't shake their hands, it must have been that. That is arguably a textbook argument from ignorance fallacy. You can look this up. It's called the argument from ignorance fallacy. And what the argument of ignorance fallacy is, I can't think of a better explanation, so therefore it must be this. So when you say, how do you know that this is an example of racism? They say, well, what else would it be? They're black and he didn't shake their hands, so it must be that he's a racist, right? That is a textbook argument from ignorance. I'll give you an analogy. When you challenge someone who says that they saw a flying saucer, you say to them, how do you know it was a flying saucer? They'll say, well, what else could it have been? That is a textbook argument from ignorance fallacy. And what it translates to is, I can't think of a better explanation for what I witnessed. Therefore, X. In the case of the flying saucer, it's I can't think of a better explanation, therefore it must be aliens. In the case of this video with Boris, it's I can't think of a better explanation for it, therefore racism. And you will see this coming up again and again in the tweets, which I'm going to share with you on the screen. So these tweets were all tweeted in response to John Cleese's sharing of this particular video. And this person said, holy crap, doesn't even try to hide it. Now again, that addresses the specific psychological point that I made earlier. What would have to be true in order for this specific behavior of Boris Johnson to constitute racism? What would have to be true is the following. Boris Johnson is an out-and-out bigot and racist, and is so bigoted and so racist that even when the world's cameras are watching, that he refused to share the hands of two black gentlemen. He skipped them intentionally because of his bigotry, because he thought that he was better than them, because he's white and a white supremacist and a racist. I mean, come on. Now, again, all those things might be true, but this video clip is not evidence of that. This is the thing that people keep misunderstanding. The video clip is an observation. That is the observation. The question is, how do we explain the observation? And I gave you 3 possible candidate explanations and which one I thought was most likely. But please notice, I didn't say that I know or that I'm even entirely convinced that the one I've selected is the explanation. The real answer, if we're all being honest here, is we don't know why Boris didn't shake the hands of those 2 black gentlemen. It could be random. It could be that he's a racist. It could be that he was only shaking the hands of those who gestured to do the same. I don't know which one it is. I'm just not going to believe you when you assert that this is explained by racism. Just like I'm not going to believe the person who asserts that the unidentified flying object in the sky is aliens. This is basic critical thinking, basic skepticism. And the tweets go on. This next tweet, sadly, it's very believable. And that, of course, is in response to John Cleese saying that this is unbelievable. And again, I mean, I don't know, what am I supposed to say to these people? The next tweet, unfortunately, it's very believable and very in like with his character. Whatever that means. No, look, I'm not going to get into vocabulary and grammatical error critique, but that would be beneath me, rather petty. But yeah, look, these people are all just hook, line, and sinker, convinced, yeah, that's obviously an example of racism. There it is, racism, right out in the open. Do these people strike you as skeptical thinkers? Because they certainly don't strike me that way. This next one, I'm going to show you the actual dialogue. There was a couple of over and back, or a bit of over and back here, and I think it's worthy of your attention, seeing all of it. So this person tweets, should he just grab their hands? Now, that was a point that I made. How unusual would it be if in the middle of clapping your hands, somebody awkwardly shoved their hand into the middle of your clapping hands to try and shake your hand? That just wouldn't work, would it? It's just awkward and impractical. So that's what this person said. And of course, this person says in response, Boris could have offered, but instead he didn't skip a beat to bypass them. Oh, Boris, you despicable racist. He didn't skip a beat and bypass them. I mean, obviously this person has made up their mind. This person then responds, yeah, I mean, they very clearly didn't offer their hands. So this person even acknowledges that point. They very clearly didn't offer their hands. Everyone else did. Maybe he was just reacting to outstretched hands, ? Doesn't look good, that's for sure. So despite recognizing that there are other candidate explanations, this person still comes to the conclusion that this doesn't look good for Boris. Now, maybe they're just making a purely technical point. Maybe it just purely at a technical level doesn't look good. Maybe he should have been more cognizant in the moment. Maybe he should have been more self-aware. But, I mean, what happened to the principle of charity? Well, that went down the toilet with the internet, didn't it? Because if you applied the principle of charity to this scenario, you would come to the same conclusion I did, that this is a massive press conference, a gigantic meeting of conservative minds. Right? He's walking out. There are quite literally thousands of people in that crowd, and he's shaking hands randomly all over the shop. Now, the racist believers would assume that it wasn't so random, that he definitely didn't shake the hands of those black gentlemen precisely because they were black, but they would have to demonstrate that case. And before anybody thinks that I'm asserting that he did it randomly, again, I'm not. I was just speaking casually there. I don't know what methodology Boris was using in his handshaking approach. I don't know. Perhaps we could sit down and have a chat with Boris. Or perhaps there's a cunning psychologist who could watch that clip and see evidence of explicit and obvious racism. All I'm saying is that asserting that what happened in the video is best explained by racism is just that, an assertion. And as Christopher Hitchens once put it, and I've said this in many of my videos, and I'll say it again, goddammit, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed as such. In other words, if you ain't got no evidence for your claim, I don't have to take it seriously. And so this person concludes and responds and says they don't want a handshake, so they don't exist. Not even a thanks for clapping. Oh my God. Again, just mind reading, basically. This person assumes that because they didn't extend their hand, Boris Johnson just came to the conclusion that they don't exist. I don't think I need to explain to an intelligent audience like yourselves how ridiculous that claim is. How intentionally and emotionally provocative it's designed to be. And again, not a single morsel of evidence in sight. And let me read one more just for good measure. Makes me proud not to live in that country these days, and folks wonder why Scotland and Wales are looking at independence. First of all, this person is clearly completely unaware that Scotland already had an independence referendum and they voted to remain in the UK. So this person is very clearly ill-informed. But even then, it makes you proud not to live in this country because Boris Johnson didn't shake the hands of two black gentlemen in a crowd where he's shaking the hands of people who extend. Oh, guys, it really doesn't bode well, does it? It really doesn't bode well. But those are just some of the many thousands of reactions. I'm happy to report, by the way, I won't be dishonest with you, that there were many people in that comment thread, and go check if you want to see for yourself. There were many people in response to John Cleese's tweet who were saying things like what I'm saying in this video. And so I'm happy to see that there are other rational skeptics among the mob. And so that was reassuring. So in conclusion, guys, if it wasn't abundantly clear already, the point of this video is that if you want somebody to be convinced of a case that you're making, you must desist with the bad arguments. A collection of bad arguments all added up together doesn't make a good argument. It just makes a collection of bad arguments. And if you want people to be convinced by what you're claiming, you must remove the bad arguments from your repertoire, because those bad arguments simply serve as evidence to skeptics like me that you do not have a good case. I mean, ask yourself, if you saw a bad argument amongst a collection of arguments that somebody was erecting in support of a particular cause or case, would that give you cause for confidence in that person's point of view? Or would you be, like me, doubting the veracity of their case? It's a good question, right? I mean, if somebody has a bad argument amongst their pile of arguments, that casts a negative shade on all of the others, doesn't it? I mean, why would somebody need a bad argument in their pile of arguments if their case was strong to begin with? And so, guys, I want to conclude by sharing one final video clip with you, which I have assembled myself personally. The problem with bad arguments is that they can be so easily countered and you hurt your own position. So again, to reiterate, if you really, truly and deeply care about the anti-racist cause, you must desist with the usage of the word racist where it does not apply. And you must not use bad arguments like the one presented in this video, i.e. Boris Johnson didn't shake the hands of two black gentlemen, therefore he's a racist. Because if you do use arguments like this, then it is utterly trivial to dismiss them. Case in point. Check it out. So is Boris Johnson a racist? Frankly, that is not the point of this video. All I've tried to demonstrate in this video is how not to identify a racist. A video clip where an individual simply fails to shake the hands of two black gentlemen does not constitute good evidence of racism. Remember, such a video simply contains an example of human behavior. Human behavior which can be explained in numerous ways. Sure, racism is one possible candidate explanation, but there are many others. And if you're so confident that Boris Johnson is a racist to begin with, then surely you don't need to use this poor example of evidence in favour of that conclusion. Presumably, you have the silver bullet already loaded in the chamber. And if indeed that is the case, that is the piece of evidence that you should be marshalling. You merely weaken your case by using bad evidence. So guys, if you've extracted the point that I've attempted to convey in this video, then remember this. If you want racism to go away, if you want to defeat racists and you care about the anti-racism movement, be very careful about your usage of the word racist and be very careful about the arguments that you deploy in favour of your position. Otherwise, you risk becoming synonymous with that little old boy who cried wolf all those years ago. If you enjoyed this video, guys, please do drop a like in it. And if you've been enjoying my content more generally, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And if you do, make sure you check the bell notification icon. That way you'll be able to stay up to date with all things on the channel, and you'll even be notified as and when my latest videos go live. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I hope to see you in the next one. All the best. Bye-bye.